Hello, Global Studies. This is Mr. Gallagher. We are going to do some background notes today on our next topic of our Create an Island project, which is government. This is my personal favorite topic and is one of my favorites to talk about. Let's take a look at this picture below. We are looking at the ratification of the U.S. Constitution. We have many of our founding fathers here, with George Washington here holding the newly ratified Constitution in the new United States of America. So let's get into this and start talking about what government actually is. All right, so what does a government do? A government is an organization that keeps order, sets rules, and provides services for a society. So they are the people in charge of creating our laws and enforcing them, and also providing services for people to take advantage of. All right, we have two types of government. We have limited government and unlimited government. All right, so limited government is a government that does not have complete control over its citizens. That means that a government has limited power. So let's think about that for a second. Would that mean that the government has more, or the citizens in this type of government have more rights or less rights? Well, in this case, since the government has limited control of its citizens, the population of that government would actually have more rights, as opposed to unlimited government, which means that a government has complete control over every aspect of its citizens' lives. That means the government has unlimited power. And thinking about that again, if a government has unlimited power, that typically means that the people or the citizens of that country or government are going to have less rights or no rights than they would as if it was a limited government. All right, so then we have this idea of citizenship. Citizenship is basically membership to a country. Citizenship is membership in a state or a nation with full rights and responsibilities. So if you're a citizen of the United States, it means that the Constitution applies to you. You get to take advantage of all of the rights and responsibilities in the Constitution. And a citizen of a country owes loyalty to that country and must abide by the laws. Our laws can be found, again, in our Constitution. So let's start looking at the different types of government. The first one we're going to look at is democracy. This is the one most of us should be most familiar with, as this is what the United States is. In a democracy, citizens elect representatives to govern them. So the people actually have the power to choose who their leaders are going to be. And that is from the local level, like city councilmen, mayors, it could be aldermen, depending on what type of city you live in, all the way up to a governor or a state senator or a state representative, and finally to the president of the United States, to senators in the United States, or congressmen in the United States as well. And we have three branches of government. We have a legislative branch, which creates laws. In the bottom right-hand corner, this is our Congress. Okay, we have an executive branch, which carries out the laws. Currently, our executive is Joe Biden. I'm going to move myself over here. And then we have our third branch of government, which is the judicial branch, which we have our Supreme Court justices up here. And their job is to interpret the laws and make rulings as to whether or not the laws are being followed. All right, so we have all of our Supreme Court justices here. And we have one thing to note, that we have Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who died earlier in 2020, who was replaced by Justice Amy Coney Barrett, who is not pictured in any of the new Supreme Court pictures that I could find. An example of a three-branch of government that would be a democracy would be the United States. The next one we're going to take a look at, and I'll move myself again, is a monarchy. And this is when we have a king, queen, or an emperor that is ruling society. In this case, the monarch usually inherits the office. So we have a picture here of King Louis XIV of France, also known as Louis the Great. A couple interesting things about Louis XIV of France. He ruled from 1643 to 1715 and is actually the longest ruling monarch of any European king or queen in history. So it's kind of an interesting piece of information about him. He was also an absolute monarch, which we are going to look at on the next slide. So we have two types of monarchs. We have absolute monarchy, in which citizens have few or no rights because all decisions are made by the monarch. And a current example of this would be Saudi Arabia, of King Salman of Saudi Arabia. He is an absolute monarch. And we have a constitutional monarchy, in which a king or queen shares power with a government that's organized by a constitution. So examples of this could be like the United Kingdom, Canada, or Norway. as we have a picture here of Queen Elizabeth II of England. The third type of government that we'll take a look at here is dictatorship. Now, I really like this picture, and we're going to look at the definition here in a second and talk about this picture. A dictatorship is when one person rises to power and rules society. Now, let's take a look at this image, this cartoon here. We have our dictator here. He is speaking to all these microphones. And then what's interesting, if we look at the microphones, is the microphones are actually attached to the people's heads, meaning like whatever the dictator says is what the people have to do, and that's usually through force or violence at times. All right, so we'll take a look at some current dictatorship. All right, which would be North Korea. Let's find a good place to put me. So a dictator controls all aspects of life. That means a dictator is going to control education, the arts, and the economy, or how people are going to earn and make money. Communism is typically an economic system that is associated with a dictatorship, meaning the government makes all economic decisions for its population, meaning if you are a highly skilled lawyer, but there are no construction workers, even if you have no experience building houses, the government might tell you you're going to be a construction worker and have to build houses, even if you have no idea how to do that. On the flip side, if you are working construction and there are no lawyers, the government could say you're going to become a lawyer, because that's what in a dictatorship and in communism the government is allowed to do. All right, and obviously this kind of goes without saying, but in a dictatorship or in a communist country, citizens have few or no rights. Our example here would be North Korea. We have Kim Jong-un here on the right, who is the current dictator of North Korea. And an interesting piece of information about the North Korean dictatorship is they are the first country that has had a family dynasty of dictators. Kim Jong-un's grandfather was named Kim Il-sung, and he was the first dictator of North Korea in the 1940s and 50s and 60s, 70s, and 80s. And he was then, once he died, his son Kim Jong-il took over until around like 2010 or 2011 when he died, and Kim Jong-un took over for his dad. So he is the third in line of a dynasty of dictators for North Korea. And the last form of government that we'll discuss here is called an oligarchy. Now, this one's not super common in the world today. There are some countries that are very close to an oligarchy, but would not consider themselves an oligarchy. If we look at oligarchies historically, going back to, long time, we go back to ancient Greece. The kingdom of Sparta in Greece was actually an oligarchy because they had two kings that were in charge of the country. And if we use that as an example, that would be a group of a few people ruling society. So in the case of ancient Sparta, we had two kings that were in charge of ruling society together. In that case, one king was usually geared for war, and another was more geared for domestic or citizen issues to worry about. Typically in an oligarchy, the ruling group is going to be rich or have military power, and they usually rule for their own interests, not for the interests of the poor or any lower economic or socioeconomic classes. All right, so a current example of an oligarchy in the United States, or not in the United States, in the world, would be the country of Burma or Myanmar. And now we call it Burma or Myanmar because depending on the group that's in charge, depends on the name of the country. So in my lifetime, Burma has changed its name to Myanmar, back to Burma, and back to Myanmar several times based on whichever ruling group has been in power. All right, and in an oligarchy, based on what we know about the rulers typically ruling for their own interests and not for the interests of the poor or other citizens, that means that our citizens are going to have few or no rights. So that's going to end our conversation today on government. What you are going to do is make sure you have your note sheet filled out, and you are going to actually choose one of these government systems to use on your island project. That's what we'll do for the government section, is you are actually going to decide whether or not you'd like to use a democracy, a monarchy, and if you choose monarchy, you're going to decide whether it's an absolute monarch or a constitutional monarch. You'll look at dictatorship or choose from oligarchy. So it's up to you to decide, based on your notes, what you might like to apply to your island. That's all I have for you today. Thank you for your attention. Make sure you get the note sheet filled out because you are going to want to use this for your Create an Island portfolio. Have a great day, guys.